So what can we learn from this? What does this incrementalism towards Syria tell us? Well, there's all kinds of explanations out there for why the administration has been so reluctant to pursue a more aggressive posture towards Syria. Almost all of them are unflattering. The regime is hypocritical, it lacks political, the Obama administration, I apologize. Hypocritical, lacks political will, it's a double standard, we did it in Egypt, why can't we do it? All of that. I would suggest that there's something else at work. And you know, maybe I'm at risk of imposing a bit too much coherence on what we've seen out of the White House. But I'm willing to take that risk for purposes of our conversation today. I think if we look at the uprisings that have happened over the past 6 months, what we really see in some respects is an outline of a set of principles concerning the conditions under which the administration is prepared to throw its weight behind a movement for popular change in the Arab world. And I think what also becomes clear is that it's really Syria's failure to meet these conditions that has been critical in determining the administration's posture on Syria. And I want to very quickly run through 5 conditions that I think are critical for understanding the decision-making behind the administration's policy. And fortunately, there are some people in this room who can tell me I'm wrong, and I'm sure will tell me I'm wrong once they've heard these 5 conditions. And these mirror some of the things that we've discussed already. First, the presence of forces capable of managing a transitional period should the current regime be overthrown. The army played this role in Egypt and Tunisia. Even in Yemen, which is growing increasingly chaotic, there's a sense that there are some army units, some tribal units willing to play this kind of a role. The international community is developing, cultivating this role. In the Libyan case, there's really no sense that we have this kind of capacity in Syria. There are no meaningful ruptures to date within the ruling coalition. The army seems to be holding together and so on. Second, the administration seems to require some level of confidence that an uprising is anchored in what the political scientist Adam Jaworski called a shared collective vision of a viable political future. This is something which in the Syrian case I think has always been a bit of a question mark. I think the opposition has made enormous progress over the past 3 months in trying to define this kind of shared collective vision. And again, that's really due to the very important efforts of Ammar and his colleagues in the opposition to overcome the internal fragmentation that defined participants in the uprising in the beginning. But for whatever reason, this progress really has not yet broken through the sense of uncertainty within the administration about the intentions of the Syrian uprising and where it might lead, and about the extent to which the exile leadership really represents the participants in the uprising on the ground. And this gets us to the third condition, also mentioned by Ammar, which is that the administration places a significant premium on the presence of a viable and credible civilian opposition and a group of leaders with some demonstrated capacity, not only to help guide the transition itself, but who can provide the kind of leadership that would help to consolidate a post-authoritarian political order. And I have to say, you know, again, I know I'm saying a lot of nice things about Ammar, but he deserves them. And you know, Ammar made a statement following the president's speech, which was quite courageous, I think, in the context of where this process is, in which he said the opposition does not have it together. And we have to recognize that. And we have to address it if we expect to secure the support of Western governments. And it seems to me that this is a kind of wake-up call to his colleagues that I would hope that they listen to, because I do think it matters. Fourth, the administration also attaches importance for the possibilities for an orderly, negotiated exit on the part of the existing authoritarian leader. And I think what's happening in Yemen is the perfect example of why that's an important criteria. Because where negotiated exit strategies don't exist, the possibilities for chaos and violence go way up. And fifth, and finally, at least part of the administration's calculus, I think, seems to reflect an assessment of the likelihood that the fall of a regime will be followed by a collapse into social violence. And here, too, there is this sense, whether it was constructed by the regime, cultivated by the regime, or reflects reality in some measure, that Syrian society is fragmented along sectarian lines, along regional and class lines, along urban-rural lines, and that the potential for social violence following a collapse is high. And again, this despite what I would argue is some significant progress in overcoming that impression on the part of the opposition. But when you put these 5 conditions together, I think it's not terribly surprising why the administration has proceeded as cautiously as it has in responding to the Syrian uprising, even though it faces very real strategic incentives for taking a more aggressive posture toward Syria. And as a kind of closing note, I think what we can say is that it also seems to me that these 5 conditions establish a set of baselines or metrics that the administration is going to use in weighing where to go from here following the president's speech. Now, I will say that I don't think that falling short on these metrics implies that the U.S. does nothing. I don't think it implies that the U.S. will inevitably resist taking a harder position against the Assad regime. And I do think, as I said, that based on what we've seen in U.S. diplomacy towards Syria thus far, we're rapidly reaching the point at which that decision is going to have to be taken. But I would argue that because Syria falls short on all 5 of these conditions, that what it would take for the U.S. to move beyond that threshold toward an explicit condemnation of the regime would be some fairly serious trigger. I don't think it's going to happen without that kind of very serious triggering event.